Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, brought to you and presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I introduce to you Brother Chris Ludke.
This is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to do something a little different. Sometimes Masonic education means looking at tools and ideas that we all hold in common. Sometimes, though, it means what I tend to refer to as pragmatic education, or secular education, or profane education, however you want to look at it. But there are certain topics, certain ideas that are out there where they come up and they're not necessarily Masonic. And that's what I want to get to today. What I want to do is review a book that I've recently read called Stolen Focus by Johann Hari. And just to give you a little bit of background, I have recently come across an article talking about how we just need to turn the TVs off. We just need to turn the phones off. That's all we need to do. And we always hear that message. If only people would put down the electronic device, society would be fixed. And I don't think that's entirely the case. And I think that's the beauty of this book. He's looking at this and really exploring the ideas of what it is, what focus is, and why we're running into trouble with it. So again, the book is called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention. It's by Johann Hari. These are my ideas. They don't necessarily represent the views of the Grand Lodge of Wisconsin, but sometimes we need to explore things that go beyond Masonry, and that's what we're doing here. So, on to the topic. When you read the book, the entire premise of the book is that there's a lot of different things going on when it comes to focus. One of the first things the author does is goes off and spends a summer with absolutely no electronics and talks about how wonderful this experience is and how it's completely impractical in day-to-day life because we need cell phones to do things. We need an app to participate in almost everything today. And so the idea of simply releasing ourselves is problematic. He also points out that the amount of information that we have gotten on a daily basis has shifted from 1850 or so, when we received about the equivalent of one newspaper worth of data per day. This is all of the information you take in, from everything from advertising to discussions to reading to television, etc., to today, where we take in approximately 200 newspapers worth of information. It's not that we can't focus, it's that we have gotten very good at being filtering machines, at trying to figure out what is important and what isn't, and that leads to a number of different situations. So I want to look at some of the ideas in the book, kind of explore them with a little more depth, see how we might apply them to become better men. So one of the points that he comes across is, or discusses, is that we now live in an attentional pathogenic culture. In other words, an environment in which sustained deep focus is extremely hard for everyone. And that you have to swim upstream to achieve it. It's not actually your fault entirely that you cannot focus. It's a society in which we live. We have internet companies that will go out and do everything they can to keep you on your Facebook feed or keep you on Reddit or whatever other website you're on. We have all sorts of different things that are designed to catch your attention. It could be advertisement, it could be music, it could be something else. So attention spans, according to Hari, are decreasing at a time when we need them the most. One of the biggest contributors to inaction on big issues is the lack of focus. When attention breaks down, problem solving also breaks down. No one can really sit there and pay attention to a massive issue for years at a time when we can't sit through a class for more than 20 minutes. And this becomes a huge issue. And again, it's this splitting of focus. Our lives are busier. The information we're taking in is greater, not busier. Most office workers never actually get an hour to themselves over the 8 hours when they're in the office. Heck, even the average CEO, according to Hari, of a Fortune 500 company, gets just 28 uninterrupted minutes a day. And think about it. When you're in the office, maybe you have messages coming through, you have meetings you need to go to, you have everything else going on, and then you also have to go and do whatever your job is. And this constant switching is a problem because when you switch from task to task, you tend to lose things, you lose focus, and it takes a considerable amount of time to get back into whatever you were doing in the first place. Two of the best quotes that come from this are, "Empathy is one of the most complex forms of attention we have and the most precious. Many of the most important advances in human history have been advances in empathy. But because empathy is a form of attention, is a form of focus, we start losing empathy for one another, a key element of Freemasonry or any fraternal organization, as we lose focus. Because while we may feel empathetic for this brother, for this gentleman, for whomever, in the moment, 20 minutes later, we've forgotten why we were going to be empathetic for them in the first place, because we've moved on to something else. Could be an article we've read, it could be a phone call we've received, could be a text message. And so we see this decrease in empathy happening at the same time when we see a decrease in attention because of all of these sources of information, sources of data that are just dumping on us like a fire hose day after day after day. Again, it's not that we lost the ability to have attention, it's that we became filter machines. We've learned to filter information far better than actually pay attention to it. And it's not actually your fault, according to Hari. It's by design. The truth is that you are living in a system that is pouring acid on your attention every day. And then you are being told to blame yourself and to fiddle with your own habits while the world's attention burns. Basically, what's happening is these companies, be it a social media company or anyone else, is out there trying to keep your eyeball on their website. They're trying to do that because the longer you're on their website, the more advertisements that you will see, which means the more revenue they make. They're breaking your attention intentionally, or holding your attention intentionally, to make profits. It feels horrible when you really start thinking about it. And we're in a system where everyone's trying to really push for your attention, not just advertisers or social media, but family members, civic organizations, schools, your children and all of their activities, because there are all sorts of activities being pushed on your child at school or wherever else that they're trying to get them involved in. And meanwhile, your child is sitting there on the screen because you're so busy with other things. So it's not a question of willpower, it's a question of the system overall. So if we want to do what matters in any domain, any context in life, be it Masonically or otherwise, we have to be able to give attention to the right things. If we can't do that, it's really hard to actually do anything. And you've all met people like this, people who don't seem to have direction, don't seem to do much. And the issue is that they're constantly being pulled in some other direction. They're constantly in Facebook or in something else, and because they're constantly jumping back and forth, think of multitasking and how bad that is. Same thing. We're told we need to do multiple things at once. You can't actually do that. It's simply not something that we have evolved as humans to do. And there are many staggering facts and case studies within stolen focus that the author talks about. One particular area is the collapse of sustained reading. If you're reading any book, it might be, or the summary of any book, it might be because you can't actually focus on reading the entire book, something that we don't want to think about. 57% of Americans do not read a single book in a typical year. Instead, the average American spends about 5.4 hours on social media or their phone. really kind of the same thing in today's day and age. Think about that. 5 hours a day. Think about that in terms of the 24-inch gauge. Where's that 5 hours coming from? Is it coming from refreshment and you're cutting your sleep, for example? Is it coming from service to deity? Is it coming from work or your vocation? Where do we get that time? And what could we do with that time if we somehow reclaimed even a part of it? Even 2 hours a day. What can you accomplish in 2 hours a day? I think you would be shocked if you really gave that a shot. If you find it, I'm again quoting a little bit here, if you find it difficult to read, it's easy to blame yourself. You might tell yourself that you're lazy, you're not good enough. What's wrong with you? But Johann Hari argues that you are not the problem. Your difficulty is a system problem. The big tech companies have designed an environment to steal your attention. This is not a battle that you can win through willpower. It's like trying to quit alcohol in a liquor store. It's just not going to happen. Hari argues that while the average person can make changes, the whole system actually requires an overhaul. The problem is there's no good answer. Whenever you have a systemic problem, a big, deep systemic problem, the only real answer for it is some form of revolution. It could be a systemic revolution. So, for example, the digital revolution would be one of those. Or it could be something bigger, a societal revolution. You don't usually want to live through those. Sometimes. Depends who you are. So, what do you do about it? I mean, I've just laid out all of these different problems. And Hari even says, I have not entirely solved this problem myself. In fact, at this moment, as Hari writes this in lockdown, his attention has never been worse. So, let's look at some of these other big ideas that are there. What are ways that you can improve your attention? Well, there's a few. You can use something called pre-commitment to stop switching tasks so much. What this means is that you schedule your time. You may have read about various tech entrepreneurs, etc., using 15-minute systems and 5-minute systems and blocks of time and everything else. That's basically the concept. You're pre-committing yourself in this span of time to do this specific thing, and you will not do anything else. Could be as simple as I'm going to do the dishes without anything else going on, without listening to an audiobook or listening to a movie or whatever else. It's kind of a cross between mindfulness and pre-planning. And when you do that, if you pre-plan something, you're much more likely to follow through. The psychological studies tend to back this idea. Number 2, don't listen to negative self-talk. We tend to sit there, especially as Americans, and we go, well, it must be me. I must be lazy. I'm not good enough. What's wrong with me? And at the end of the day, it's great to take an individual view of what you believe you are contributing to the problem. However, that can go too far. You can get into a realm where you start spiraling and believing that you're not good enough, and therefore you don't have the confidence to actually make the changes you need in order to move forward, in order to improve yourself. Number 3, take extended time away from social media. In the author's case, what they're referring to is not that you're going to cut off all social media forever, because it's very unlikely you can practically do that. If you're an officer of the lodge, for example, you probably need to put information out on social media so that people know about the events that are going on. No, what you need to do is take extended breaks. And so the author, Hari, refers to taking 6 months off at a time, and so 6 months on, 6 months off. But in a more practical sense, maybe it's as simple as taking 2 weeks off, or taking every other month off, or however it's going to work. Maybe it simply means that you refuse to use social media between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. And that way you have half the day that you're not using it, and then you have sleep, so it's limiting what you're doing. It's limiting that time suck that is the internet and social media at times. And by the way, this is not to say that you shouldn't be out there researching topics, studying things. The internet has very good materials on it. It's basically all of human knowledge in a little rectangle that we carry around in our pocket. And yet most of us use it to argue with strangers and look at pictures of cats. If we use it properly, it's an incredible tool. It's when we don't use it properly and we use it to live vicariously through some Insta-Snap-a-Chatagram star that it becomes a real problem. Number 4, embrace mind wandering. Letting your mind wander is not a crumbling of attention, but in fact a crucial form of attention in its own right. Hari's argument here is that by letting your mind wander, you develop creativity, you develop imagination, you also develop the connections between materials that you've brought in. For example, drawing together a Masonic teaching that we've talked about on this podcast or that you've heard about in Lodge and connecting that to a practical problem in your life. You're going to do that a lot during mind wandering, what we would call daydreaming. And that's really important. Number 5, sleep is not a luxury. It is essential for sustained focus. In our American society, we tend to sit there and go, oh, I can cut sleep. It's fine. It's just that thing that I do where I'm non-productive for 8 hours of the night. But in truth, it's incredibly important. Why? Because when you sleep, there's chemicals and basically spinal fluid that washes through your brain. It washes out a lot of these molecules that build up during the day and allows sort of a reset. It allows you to take material that you took in during the day, make sense of it, file it appropriately in your memory, whether it's long-term memory or short-term memory or working memory, and make use of it. If you're ever trying to memorize ritual, for example, the best thing you can do is actually memorize it the day before or 2 days before, and then make sure that you sleep on it well. And you will find that the next day, even though you were stuttering out over it on Tuesday, on Wednesday when you wake up, you're going to be much clearer on it because your brain has had time to organize the information, to properly file it away. If you lack sleep, you lack focus. And we all know this. We've all seen it. You've had that late night where you got 4 hours of sleep, you woke up the next day, you went to work, and you went, wow, I can't actually focus on anything except the need for coffee. Which is, well, problematic. Finally, number 6. Embrace play and unstructured free time. This can be a great form of focus. How is play and free time focus? Again, this is time where your brain isn't actively working on a specific problem, which means it can wander. It can connect things. And that unstructured free time, that time where there's nothing else going on, means that there isn't material coming in. It gives your brain a break. You don't have to filter information when you're out doing something else. And unstructured free time doesn't mean you're just sitting on the couch doing nothing. You could be out for a run. You could be playing with your kids or grandkids. You could be doing any number of things. They just shouldn't be productive things. So you're not doing something that is going to be cognitively stimulating. And that's important. It gives your brain a rest. So out of these 6 things, we had pre-commitment, so scheduling time to do specific tasks and avoid multitasking. Don't listen to negative self-talk because we tend to blame ourselves for our weaknesses, even though in this case, it's not likely your weakness. Number 3, extended times away from social media. Basically, take breaks. Number 4, embrace mind wandering. Allow your brain to make the connections. It needs time to do that. If you're always bringing in information, you can't actually deal with the information you have. Number 5, sleep is not a luxury. Get sleep so that your brain can organize that information into short-term, long-term memory and piece it together. And finally, number 6, embrace play and unstructured free time to give your brain a break from all of the information coming into it. And by the way, this could be meditation, this could be any number of different things. It's just giving your brain a break, whatever that looks like for you. Now, according to Hari, A small study investigated how often an average American college student actually pays attention to anything. This speaks very strongly to me because I teach history and art history at the college level. So scientists involved put tracking software on these students' computers and monitored what they did in a typical day. They discovered, on average, a student today would switch tasks once every 65 seconds. The median amount of time, average roughly, that they focused on any one thing was just 19 seconds. And by the way, if you're an adult, which most of you are, and you're tempted to feel superior, I would strongly suggest that you hold off. A different story by Gloria Mark, a professor of informatics at the University of California, Irvine, observed how long an adult working in an office stays on one task. It was 3 minutes. Another study, these studies are important because they illustrate a lot of the problems. Another study by Professor Michael Posner at the University of Oregon found that if you are focusing on something and you get interrupted, on average it will take 23 minutes for you to get back on the same state of focus. Now that's important. That's called switching in this book. In psychology, there's lots of terms for lots of things, but the idea of switching is that when you change tasks, in other words, when you're multitasking, or say you're doing one job and then suddenly you're interrupted and you're asked to do another, the issue that you run into is that at the end of the day, you have to get back to the primary task, whatever it was you were supposed to be doing. And on average, it takes 23 minutes to do that. Now, think about that. You're sitting down at your computer, you're trying to work on something, your child comes up to you, your spouse comes up to you, they want these conversations. If they're happening more than once every 23 minutes, you never actually have focus in the first place. And so the idea here is that you want to avoid switching as much as possible. Because every time you switch, you cause mental exhaustion, you cause less focus, and more likely to have errors. A different study of office workers in the United States found that most of them never get an hour of uninterrupted work in a typical day because your cell phone is going off. Maybe there's text messages, maybe it's Slack, maybe it's a chat amongst the office, something particularly important, maybe it's a meeting that goes on. But think about that. You never get an hour of uninterrupted work in a typical day. Imagine how productive we would be if we just sat down and did the one thing we needed to do and then did the next thing we needed to do. All this switching is causing what appears from the outside to be a lack of focus, when in reality, it's not a lack of focus. It's simply a lack of time, which is uninterrupted. Solving big problems requires the sustained effort of many people over many years. Democracy itself requires the ability of a population to pay attention long enough to identify real problems, distinguish them from fantasies or false realities, false truth, whatever you want to call it these days, and come up with solutions and hold their leaders accountable if they fail to deliver them. If we lose that, we lose our ability to have a fully functioning society. Fancy way of saying, if we're not paying attention to what's going on in democracy, we're not watching the politics and seeing what's going on beyond simply the messaging, i.e., we should be using critical thinking here and focusing on it, then we're going to lose the democracy because it becomes easier to allow authoritarians to take power because they don't want us listening. You see where this goes. The less we focus, the less likely we are to be truly involved in politics, to see both sides, to critically think about the messages that we're getting, which means we're more likely to listen to the messages, which tends to lead you down a road towards, not necessarily to, I'm not saying fascism, etc., but towards authoritarianism, where someone is going to be responsible for giving you the message and we're simply trusting that they're giving us the right one. So there are 3 ways that task switching degrades our focus. There's switching cost. In other words, you lose focus when you're switching between tasks, and it takes you that 23 minutes to get back that focus. Number 2, screw-up effect. When you switch between tasks, errors that wouldn't have otherwise happened start to creep in because you lose where you were. Suddenly you're jumping ahead, or you're repeating something that you've already done. And finally, creativity drain. In the long run, you're likely to be far less creative when your mind cannot focus on this one task, this one issue that you need to get done. Instead, you're focused on getting your kid to school and the meeting with the boss and the meeting with the client and it becomes impossible to actually sit down and focus. And that focus is important in an age of messaging, in an age of postmodern, quote unquote, relative truth. You need to be able to sit down and really think about what you're hearing, not just take it and accept it. It's really taking many of those ideas of those 7 liberal arts and applying them to focus here. Focus is simply proving many of those points. So at the end of the day, after you read Hari's book, you get a specific idea. And the idea is this: a digital detox is not the solution for the same reason that wearing a gas mask for 2 days a week outside isn't the answer to pollution. It might, for a short period of time, keep, at an individual level, certain effects at bay. But the idea of simply walking away from electronics, walking away from digital life, social media, simply isn't sustainable, and it doesn't address the systemic issues. This is a big problem. It's a societal issue. And while we can't deal with it as an individual, we can by changing our individual habits. Getting back to those 6 big ideas, those 6 things that Hari brings up that improve his attention: the use of pre-commitment, don't listen to your negative self-talk, take extended times away from social media, embrace mind wandering, sleep, and embrace play and unstructured free time. Give your brain a break. The human brain wasn't meant for the modern life that we have today. Paleolithic man, which, let me remind you, Paleolithic man is the vast majority of human existence. If you drew a timeline of human existence, modern civilization is only the last 5,000 years or so. And throughout most of that, we had very little data. It's only the last 100 years that things have really exploded. Our brains simply haven't evolved for this. And so the next time someone comes up to you and says, you know what, the problem with society is the phone. Just put the phone down and you'll be fine. Listen to them, be polite. The attentive ear is always an important tool. But at the end of the day, know that this is not a weakness on your part. That this is in fact societal, and while there are things that you can do to help, at the end of the day, it's a sort of thing that we need to call attention to make sure that people recognize these issues so that we can actually do something about them. This has been a review of Johann Hari's Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention. And I'm hoping to do more of these on everything from philosophy to various books and ideas that are out there, from history to art history to physics, mathematics, whatever else. And hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you get something from it, because sometimes Masonic education doesn't need to be strictly Masonic. Pragmatic education, profane education is just as valuable.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org. That's WIMasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and further light in Masonry. Thank you for listening.